a creepy story. This happened many years ago in Nashville. I was about 20 and living by myself for the first time in an apartment off of Hillsborough Pike. It was 3 a.m., and he was the only person outside. I saw the same guy standing in the same spot across the street from my apartment. It was always 3 a.m. Sometimes he was wearing different clothes, sometimes he was clean-shaven, sometimes he had a full beard. They also said that technically there's no law saying that you QA and stand on the sidewalk and stare at buildings. I thought, great, I won't have to worry about what's outside my window all night. What if he was a stalker or a serial killer? What if I was the next victim? So I stayed inside and worked without saying anything. I looked out, and sure enough, he was gone. For the rest of the week, I kept expecting to see him standing outside my window, but I never did. I even checked the next morning after I heard the garbage trucks come by, but he wasn't there. I made myself a cup of tea and sat down at my computer, pretending to work. I ignored him for an hour, and then I got up and walked to the window. Did he have a sister or a mother or a grandmother who lived in the complex? Because I knew Mary's last name, I was able to find her apartment number. I didn't want to invade her privacy, so I knocked on her door and introduced myself. She recognized me immediately as Joe's pen pal. And since he didn't know any songs, he just strummed the same 3 chords over and over again. I felt bad for him, but I wasn't going to be his savior. He had stood outside my window every night for months and never worked up the courage to talk to me. Now he was trying to win me over with music. It wasn't going to work. After about 5 minutes, I went to the window and yelled, "Stop playing that stupid guitar, Joe." He stopped and looked up at me. About a month later, I moved to a new apartment. I never saw Joe again, but I often wonder if he ever moved on too. I think he was hoping I would come out and talk to him. I wasn't going to let him have that satisfaction. I went back to my dinner. She said that Joe was her brother, and that he had no other family members living in the area. We talked for a few minutes, and she said that she'd tell Joe that I'd said hello. He was still there, but now he was making movements like scratching his nose or walking on the spot. I thought maybe he wasn't dangerous, just lonely, so I waved at him. He waved back. I smiled at him. He smiled back. I couldn't take it anymore, so I put up a security camera by the window. I hoped that maybe if I could see what he was doing, it would make more sense. One night I was eating dinner when I heard the familiar sound of a car driving slowly past my apartment. I looked up and saw Joe standing on my sidewalk. I could see him clearly now, and I could see that he was carrying a guitar case. He set the case down on the sidewalk and pulled out a guitar. Then he began to play. I yelled, "Hi, Joe," at him, and he responded, "Hi, Mary." I was shocked. This guy had been standing outside my window every night for months, and he had a name. Had he finally decided to stop visiting? Maybe he'd gotten tired of me not coming to the window. I drove around the neighborhood and looked for his house, but I never found it. One day I was cleaning out my email spam folder, and I found one from a resident of that same apartment complex. Her name was Mary. Was Joe finally going to come up to my apartment and say hi? Was he going to propose marriage after all these months of courtship? When Mary finally wrote back, I was disappointed. She said that Joe was very busy and that he didn't want to come to my apartment because he didn't like confrontation. Well, isn't that just great? After all this time, he still didn't want to say hi? What kind of sick thrill was he getting out of stalking me? She was looking for her neighbor, Joe. I wrote back asking if she knew what Joe looked like, and she sent me a picture of him. It was the same man I had seen outside my window. Or maybe I'd finally convinced myself that he was a murderer, and I was imagining things. I wanted to call the cops, but I knew they wouldn't do anything. Then I'd look out the window, and he'd be standing there. Sometimes I would yell out to him, "Hey, what are you doing?" But he never answered. Other times I would pretend that I was making a video for YouTube, which is why I'm telling this story today. I would say things like, "Are you stalking me? Are you a serial killer? Do you live across the street? Why don't you come up to my door and say hi?" But he never responded. He just stood there motionless, watching me. But when I logged on, there he was, standing outside my window. I tried to concentrate on my work, but I couldn't help staring out the window. I saw him walk across the street and then back again. I hated that I couldn't figure out who he was or what he wanted. I hated that I couldn't sleep at night for worrying about him. I could see his face in the moonlight, and he was always looking at my apartment building. I never saw him move. I never saw him blink. I never saw him scratch himself or adjust his clothing. He just stood there. I began to find it a little creepy, but I still didn't think much of it. I told my mom about it, and she joked that I should marry him if he keeps showing up. So again, I didn't think much of it. I thought it was weird, but I also thought, hey, it's Nashville. There are always weird people doing weird things out at this hour. So I didn't think too much of it. I parked in my garage and went to bed. I worked for a doctor who had an office downtown, so I commuted into work every day. The problem was, I started at 4 p.m., which meant that I usually got off around midnight or 1 a.m. I lived alone, and my friends were all over the city, so it was always just me driving home late at night. One night, maybe about 2 weeks after I'd moved in, I was driving home, and I noticed this guy standing directly across the street from my apartment building. The next morning I got up, went to work, and then the next night the same thing happened. This continued to happen every night. No matter what time I got home, I would see the same guy standing in the same spot across the street. I called the police non-emergency line, and they said, unless he's actually doing something wrong, it's like breaking into cars or peeping into windows, there's nothing we can do. Then one night my boss asked me to work from home. I wanted to talk to him, but I was afraid that he might be dangerous. Finally, the night was over, and I didn't see him leave. I got up, locked all the doors, and cautiously approached the window. But then the next week, it started again. Every night at 3 a.m., I would hear a car drive by. I grew to hate this guy. One night I decided to test him. After that night, I tried to figure out who he was. I emailed her back with a question.
Us.
As the days passed, I waited impatiently for Mary to get back to me. I still didn't know who Joe was, or why he was spending so much time outside my apartment. Joe was a terrible guitarist. His fingers were too fat to make chords. Joe packed up his guitar and headed home. And that was the end of Joe's nightly visits. That was our story. This comes from a Reddit user. He says, the gas station crawler. So he's driving home very late at night. It was after midnight and he was exhausted, so he decided to stop for some gas before hitting the road again. He looks over and sees what he thinks is a dog crawling on all fours towards his car. Now he lives in an area where there are coyotes, and they can be quite large. So he assumed it was one of them. But as he continued watching, the animal kept getting closer and closer, and he could see that whatever it was, moving way too fast to be a dog. Clearly referencing the fact that whoever or whatever was out there was clearly a threat. But he didn't actually say that he did or did not. I think he probably would have mentioned that if he did. He waits around for a while, but he doesn't see anything. He checks his tire again, and they're completely flat. So he's got no choice but to wait till morning to get a tow and get new tires. I think he should have done that anyways, because how do you know that those tires are still good after being punctured like that? But he kept getting these random phone calls from different numbers, but they always asked for him by name. They told him that they couldn't release any information. But he ended up speaking to the manager, and the manager told him that a room had been rented under a fake name, and the credit card used for the reservation had been stolen. And the OP never heard from them again after that phone call. Thanks for watching. See you next time. So then the police must have gotten involved. The manager gave our protagonist the number that was associated with that credit card. The number turned out to be his own. And the person on the other end of the line always hung up right away. So it was the exact same voice that had been calling him and leaving messages on his answering machine. But he recognized that voice. It was the same voice from the gas station. It was the clerk. The clerk picked up the phone and said, "Hello." So clearly the clerk gave his number to someone who pretended to be his boss, called his house and left messages with his own phone number on his answering machine. I don't know why. Why would the clerk do that? What was the motive? And why did they use that as a cover? Because they were pretending to be his boss and trying to find out where he lived and stuff like that. Why? He blocked the numbers, but they kept calling from different ones. One of the numbers he actually recognized, and he checked his phone records to see when he called that number. His last call to that number was over a year ago, and that was before he moved to that town, and that number was registered to a local hotel. You don't know if there's still some sort of, foreign object in there, causing those things to leak air. I think it was probably for the best. So he leaves and goes to the police station to report what happened. Everybody thought it was absolutely hilarious that somebody would be scared of a coyote. So he ends up quitting his job because he was so embarrassed. His girlfriend tells him that she received a number of concerning phone calls from someone claiming to be his boss. It's asking where he was and why he didn't show up to work. Of course, he didn't show up to work because he quit. But his boss never called him. His boss would have called him if he didn't show up. So he knew he was lying. So our protagonist tells his girlfriend that he was fired that day. He was so embarrassed that he didn't even bother telling her about the coyote attack. He was so ashamed that his coworkers laughed at him. That's a little ridiculous. I mean, honestly, I would have laughed too. I mean, I'm sorry that you're going through this, but come on, don't quit your job. Just ride it out. It's not that big of a deal. And if it happened again, you could always just say, hey, it already happened once. If it happens again, I'm going to need some help, please. So I think that was a bit of an overreaction. When he gets there, they basically laugh in his face and tell him that they do and have any resources to send out to investigate. Because this would have been in the middle of the night, so they don't have any cops available. And it's not like they could send a canine out there because, whatever it was. It would have smelled them coming, and it would have ran off again. So there's really nothing they can do. Another person said, when I used to work swing shift at a gas station, we had a pack of feral cats that would hang out around the back of the building and hunt mice. I'm no expert, but I do know that cats move pretty fast and have sharp claws. Just saying, maybe it was a cat. Someone else responded to that and said, yeah, except they wouldn't have slashed the tires and climbed all over the guy's truck. Cats don't do that, and if they did, they would have killed him. And I agree with that. At this point, totally creeped out, he drops his credit card, runs away from his car, and sprints into the gas station. These animals can sometimes be huge, like the size of small dogs. They also have teeth and claws, so they can definitely do damage if they want to. Also, they are ambush predators, so they can strike very fast. I remember reading about a couple of cases where they attacked runners and bikers. One even went after a woman who was jogging at night and tore her face open. So clearly, coyotes are not something to mess with. However, I don't think that this was a coyote. Coyotes are not known for slashing people's tires and climbing on top of their vehicles, so I think that part of the story is definitely true. But I think he might have seen a coyote out there, but that's not necessarily what it was. This is around 2 a.m., and it's obviously very dark because it's in the middle of the night. So he walks around his car front and back to see if there's anyone there, because, you never know these days. You always want to make sure that you're safe. There's nobody there and everything seems fine. He opens up his car door and starts pumping his gas. As he's doing this, he notices something weird in the corner of his eye. Now, luckily this gas station was still open. They had people working inside. They had customers in there. So he wasn't just running into an empty store. He goes and looks at the footage together with the clerk. The clerk looks at him and says, "Dude, you gotta be shitting me." After looking at the tape, the two of them come back into the store and he decides to look at his truck. When he notices that all 4 of his tires have been slashed and that there are long scratch marks on the hood of his truck where this thing had apparently climbed up it. Then it just kind of sat there for a few seconds and then ran off. He darts inside, slams the door behind him, turns the lights on, and immediately looks out the window to see what was out there. And he cannot believe what he is seeing. Whatever it was, it had stopped at his car, but it wasn't doing anything. It just kind of sat there for a few moments, and it took off again, moving even faster than before. This whole thing literally happened within the span of maybe 5 minutes. So from the time he first noticed whatever was out there until it disappeared into the darkness, it took maybe 5 minutes. So he's understandably shaken by this. So he asked the clerk if they had any cameras outside, and luckily they did. He posted the story online and people were quick to respond. One user said, "Did you kill it?" Another person said, "I get that." So our narrator decides to wait around and see if whatever it was comes back. He ends up going home and waiting till morning to go to work. But once he gets to work, everybody he talks to laughs at him, and they laugh at him for what seemed like hours. And then later that day, he gets a call from his girlfriend. Now this is where the story gets really strange, because he never heard from his boss again. He decides to call the hotel and asks if someone had been staying there recently that might have given his number out. Then the wildest thing happens. He calls the number, and the person on the other end of the line says, "Hello." Anyways, this case remains unsolved. There's never any answers as to why these people did this. These are scary stories from the internet. And today's story is titled "The Lady in the Flooded Dress." There was no way he was going to make it home tonight. So he turned on his hazard lights and started inching down the road. Luckily, he had an SUV, so he didn't have to worry too much. As long as the water wasn't any higher than the door handles, he should be fine. And so far, he hadn't seen any water get any higher than the door handles. So he reached out and grabbed her hand and pulled her into the car. So he sat in the seat farthest away from her and drove away as fast as he could. Every once in a while, the woman in the passenger seat would slump over and vomit. And every time she did, our driver would pull over and help her clean herself up. He knocked on the door. His wife answered. When she saw who was in the car, she screamed. Then she quickly shut the door in our driver's face. The second she was in the car, she slumped over and vomited all over the seat. When our driver got back to the road, he realized that the water had receded quite a bit. The part of the road where he had picked up the woman was completely dry. He looked around and saw tire tracks that led away from the road and into the bushes. The tire tracks were from the same car that our driver had been driving. He explained that he needed her to come see something, but his wife wouldn't budge, and in the middle of the spot was a purse. Our driver walked over and picked up the purse. He opened it and found a cell phone and a driver's license. The name on the license was Sarah Winchester. The police were there along with Sarah's family. They had found her drowned in this exact same spot 2 years prior, but her body had been swept away by floodwaters. After speaking with the police, our driver and his wife went home and packed up their things. They bought tickets to Wyoming and flew there as soon as they could. They just found her now, and she was wearing the exact same dress that she had been wearing the night that she had drowned. Sarah Winchester had been reported missing by her family 2 weeks prior to this incident. She had been swept away by floodwaters, and they had assumed she was dead. She told our driver that she was calling the police, and that he should probably do the same. Also, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Those tire tracks were from his car. Why were there tire tracks from his car here? He had never driven here. The ground was still wet. It wasn't from the rain. It was from his car. Our driver quickly got in his car and drove home. He told his wife everything that had happened and that he needed her to pack a bag because they were leaving. Our driver looked at the ring and suddenly remembered he had seen that ring before. In fact, he had seen Sarah Winchester before. Our driver quickly went back outside and tried to wipe down the seat, but it was no use. It was disgusting. About an hour later, the woman woke up again. This time, she just stared at our driver with those soulless eyes of hers and said, "You shouldn't have saved me." Then she slumped over and went back to sleep. Our driver was driving home from Dallas to Houston. They said they needed our driver to come back to his original road. The police had found a body, and they were pretty sure it was Sarah Winchester. She had her hands up, and she was yelling for help. She stared straight ahead with a blank expression on her face and said, "Thank you for saving me. I'd pay you back with my life." Then she slumped back over and fell asleep. The water was probably up to her thighs at this point. Our driver rolled down his window and asked if she was okay. She said yes, but she needed help. She said she was stuck and asked if our driver could come back and get her. Texas, our driver quickly called the police and explained everything that had happened. They took our driver's statement and told him that they would look into it. But our driver never heard back from them, which really pissed him off, because he lived about an hour outside of Houston. He had a great job in Dallas. Our driver opened the door and yelled at her to get in. But when she looked up at him, he noticed something. Her eyes were soulless. It was like looking into a black hole. And that freaked him out a little. He knew how dangerous it was to drive through floodwaters. But looking at this woman, he also knew he couldn't leave her there. So he put his car in reverse and began slowly backing up to where the woman was. The woman was frantically waving her arms, shouting, "Hurry, hurry, hurry!" And our driver thought maybe she was in more danger than he realized. So he floored it and began reversing as fast as he could. But he wanted to be closer to his family, so he moved an hour away from them in Houston. It was definitely a bit of a commute, but he would gladly do it every day, if it meant he could be closer to his family. But this particular night was not one of those nights. It was about 10 o'clock at night. There had been a huge rainstorm all day, so the entire state of Texas was basically flooded. But then our driver rounded a bend and saw a woman standing in the middle of the road. Our driver hesitated, got close enough that the woman could grab onto the side of the car. But he told himself it was probably just shock, and she was probably just grateful that someone was coming to help her. And our driver wasn't sure he wanted to touch that. About 30 minutes into the drive, the woman suddenly perked up. "Well, Our driver decided to take the long way around so he could get home without having to go through any more flooded roads. After what felt like hours, they finally made it to our driver's house. Confused, our driver got out of the car and knocked on the door again. When our driver turned around, the woman was gone. The door was still open. So he went back to the road to see if maybe he could find the woman or maybe some sign that could explain what the hell just happened. So he followed them. They led him to a spot where there was clearly a body of water not too long ago. And as our driver was about to call the police again, he saw something else in the purse. It was a wedding ring, and it looked familiar. In fact, our driver had been driving home the day that Sarah Winchester had drowned. And what he remembered now was the news report. As our driver kept looking around, he saw another set of tire tracks leading from the road to where Sarah had been standing. Then he looked at the ground and realized something. They were only 30 minutes away from Houston when they got the call from the police. Our driver and his wife showed up at the same spot where he had found Sarah's purse. Our driver immediately recognized that dress because the last time he had seen it, it was covered in blood. Our driver didn't know why he was doing this, but he felt like he needed to start his life over somewhere else. Hi everyone, I have a short story for you, so listen up. This one is called The Man Who Spoke My Future. It was about 7 p.m. in the evening, and I was walking home after a long day of work. I stopped by the local subway station. It was always so busy with people coming and going, and it gave me a sense of peace, knowing that there were so many other people out there living their lives just like me. He had a long white beard, and his eyes were closed. As I got closer, I heard him start to speak, and these were the exact words that came out of his mouth. "You're gonna get that call tomorrow? Say yes." I knew that I had to pack my bags and get ready to move halfway across the country. As I sat on the plane, I couldn't help but think about the old man from the subway station. Was it just a coincidence that I ran into him and then I got the call? Or was there something more to it? I shook my head and tried to focus on the task at hand. I looked around to see if I could spot the old man, but of course I couldn't find him. I decided to check the local library and see if they had any records of him. There was a photo in the newspaper, and the man in the photo looked exactly like the old man, except he was much younger. I asked the old man about the photo, and he sighed. "This was taken in 1952, he said. That was a simpler time. I couldn't believe my ears. This meant that the old man was at least 70 years old, and yet he looked so young and healthy. How is this possible? I asked him, but he just smiled and refused to answer. When I explained my situation to the librarian, she smiled and said that she knew exactly who I was talking about. I thanked him for his help and for being so kind, and I left the library. Who was this old man, and why did he help me? I may never know the answers to these questions, but I'll never forget the kindness of the old man from the subway station. His words, "You're gonna get that call tomorrow. Say yes," will always ring true in my ears. "He's a regular here," she said. "He comes in every day and reads the newspaper." She pointed me in the direction of the reading room, and I thanked her. Also, do not forget to subscribe to our channel, so you never miss out on any of our amazing stories. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. I had a big project to work on, and I needed to be prepared, and I couldn't understand why the old man had spoken to me about it. I decided to do as my boss had instructed and bought a ticket for the next flight to California. Was it just a random act of kindness or something more? I decided that the only way to find out the truth was to go back to New York and try to find him again. It was lunchtime now, so the place was packed with people. I looked around for the old man, but of course I couldn't find him. Over the next few days I worked hard on the project, and I was able to put the old man and his cryptic message out of my mind. Suddenly my phone rang. It was my boss calling me. I picked up the phone. "Hello." "Hi, John," my boss said. "I hope I'm not catching you off guard, but we need you in California in the next 2 days." He looked up as I approached, and I could see the kindness in his eyes. I walked up to him and introduced myself. "Excuse me," I said. "Do you remember me? The guy from the subway station?" The old man smiled and nodded. "Yes, of course I remember you. You're the young man who asked me about the call." I sat down next to him and explained that I was trying to find out more about him. "I want to thank you for helping me. I don't know what I would have done without your advice." The old man waved his hand dismissively. "It was no trouble at all. It was my pleasure to help you." I pressed him for more information, but he was clearly not willing to share any. Simply smiled and changed the subject. "We have a really big project that needs your expertise. Are you able to fly out?" My heart skipped a beat. Was this the call that the old man had been referring to? I was in New York and California was literally on the other side of the country. How could my boss expect me to be there in only 2 days? I'm sorry, but I can't make it in 2 days. I have a lot of things to finish up here, and I just can't leave right now. Oh, come on, John. You know how important this project is. If you don't come, we'll have to postpone it, and that will cost us a lot of money. Please, John, we really need you. I'm sorry, but I can't make it. Maybe next week, though. Okay, then it's settled. Get yourself over here as soon as you can. We'll send someone to pick you up from the airport. All right, see you soon. Then he hung up. I was stunned. This was exactly the call that the old man had talked about. But why did he tell me about it? Was it a coincidence or something more? His eyes were still closed, and he didn't seem to be speaking to anyone in particular. But for some reason, his words rang in my ears long after I'd left the subway station. As I walked down the steps into the station, I noticed an old man sitting on one of the benches. You're going to get that call tomorrow? Say yes, what call? Oh, why did he tell me that? I thought about it for a few seconds, but then I shrugged it off and went to bed. I couldn't possibly imagine what the old man was talking about. So why did he say those exact words to me? Was it a warning, a prophecy, or just a crazy thing to say? I tried to forget about it and focus on getting a good night's sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I could hear his voice echoing in my head. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of water and sat down on the couch thinking about what the old man had said. Now I started thinking if this call that the man spoke of was something important. I pondered over it all day, and even though I couldn't figure it out, the more I thought about it, the more anxious I felt. I decided that I needed to do something to take my mind off of things, so I went for a walk. The next day, I woke up feeling more confused than ever. As I walked, I came across the same subway station where I met the old man. After my conversation with my boss, I was in a state of shock. In less than 24 hours, I was on a plane headed to California. When I arrived in California, everything was just as my boss had told me. Someone picked me up from the airport and drove me to my hotel. However, as the days passed, I began to wonder more and more about the old man. Who was he? Why did he tell me about the call? When I returned to New York, I went straight to the subway station. As I walked into the reading room, I saw the old man sitting at one of the tables reading the newspaper. I was about to give up when I noticed something strange. We talked for a few more minutes, but it was clear that the old man wasn't going to share any more information with me. As I walked away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of mystery and wonder. If you liked this story, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends.